Hey guys, I'm back again for like the fourth time. Um, yeah, reading chapter 4 now. Yay. Okay. So, just a quick warning, there is a bit of homophobia in this chapter, so you've been warned, I guess. You and Ink arrived in Undertale and entered Classic's house. He looked over from the couch. Hey guys, he said. You forced a smile. Ink didn't tell Classic about what had happened in the anti-void yet. But you easily figured out how to fake emotions, so Ink didn't worry about it too much. Hey, Classic, he said. He sighed and looked at the TV. You and Ink sat down on the couch on either side of him and talked for a bit. It had been 2 days since Ink and Classic let you stay in Undertale. You were doing alright. You'd easily gotten a job already at the cafe down the street. You worked behind the counter, making drinks and stuff. A guy walked up to the counter and ordered a mocha. You grabbed a cup and made the drink and handed it to him. Thanks, man. Sorry, miss, he said. You smiled. It's alright. I really don't care about it too much, you said. He nodded and sat down at a table. You looked around. It wasn't terribly busy today, you said. I mean, I guess it's nice, you thought. A few more people entered, and you sighed and took orders and got them their drinks, and they sat down at the same table the other guy was sitting at, and they all started talking. You sighed, staring into nothingness. Then some shouting was heard, coming from the table the people were sitting at. No, you are just confused. A woman raised her voice. The guy from earlier looked at the woman. Mom, I'm not confused. This is who I am. You can't change that, he said. The woman growled. First you started wearing feminine clothes, now this, she yelled. You walked over. Is there a problem here? You asked. The woman looked at you. What's wrong here is my son thinks he's gay, she said. You stared with a blank expression. Okay. And? You said. She seemed to get angrier. It's not right, she said. You shrugged. I don't see anything wrong with it. If he likes guys, he likes guys. She growled and got up, storming out. A man, who was sitting next to the woman, sighed. Sorry about that. She's always like this with these things, he said. You shrugged. I don't mind it too much. Not anymore, at least, he said. The man sighed and stood up. Come on, Violet, he said. A 10-year-old girl sitting next to the guy from earlier got off the seat and followed her father out. The guy looked at you. Thanks, he said. You nodded and hummed. He sighed and held out his hand. I'm Zach, he said. He shook his hand. Lion, he said. He smiled, then frowned slightly. Well, like my dad said, sorry about her. She doesn't support LGBTQ+. He said. You nodded. Well, I could easily gather that much, he said. He stood up. I should probably leave. My dad's probably waiting for me, he said. You stepped back, allowing him to pass you. See you around, I guess, he said, walking out. You waved to him. Then the door closed. You stopped waving, and your arm fell at your side. You were alone in the cafe now. No need to fake emotions to make yourself feel better. Not like you could feel better. You sighed and went behind the counter and set your arms on top of it. You closed your eyes for a moment, waiting for someone else to come in. A couple weeks later. The cafe was packed today. A group of high school girls were celebrating their best friend's birthday. You've met her before. She's a nice girl. Dark skin, beautiful curly hair, and brown eyes. She came to the cafe about once or twice a week. Only what her friends did was get some coupons, so she got a small variety of cupcakes, brownies, and apparently her favorite, a small shortcake. Honestly, you could understand why. Shortcakes are very sweet. And she has a bit of a sweet tooth. What was her name? Olivia? That sounds about right. You looked over at a small table where Zach was sitting, quietly enjoying his coffee. Then you heard the bell on the door ring. You looked over and saw a monster. He was humanoid, had light purple skin, 4 aquamarine-colored eyes, a mouth on both of his shoulders, a mouth on both of his forearms, near the back of his wrists, a crop top, a mouth on his stomach. His hair was light blue with dark blue streaks, like stripes. He had wolf ears and a wolf tail. The fur was the same way the hair was. He was wearing a pair of jeans with boots. He walked up to the counter and looked at the options he had.
Just some black coffee and a brownie,
He said, pulling out his wallet. He grabbed a medium-sized cup and filled it with black coffee, and grabbed a brownie, sitting on the counter. You told him how much it costed. He handed you some money, and you put it in the register. He walked over to where Zach was.
Hey, can I sit here?
He asked. Zach stared for a second, then spoke. Sure, he said. The monster pulled up a chair and sat down, taking a sip of his coffee. He looked around more inside, then the door opened and a skeleton walked in. He had a purple sweater, a light blue jacket with neon green pockets and strings on the hood. His sleeves were pink, and he had blue fingerless gloves. He had orange shorts with a white stripe down the side, and colorful shoes, and he had shades that read YOLO in neon yellow and blue. He glanced around and walked up to the counter. "Hey, what's up, dudette? I'm fresh," he said, holding his hand up. You smiled and grabbed his hand, and suddenly it felt like some energy surged up your arm into your body. The skeleton, or Fresh, seemed to feel this too, seeing you both completely paused for a moment. In that moment, you felt each other's auras, dull and soulless. You and Fresh slowly took your hands away. You saw the words on Fresh's shades change. Act natural. You plastered a smile on your face. "I'm lying," he said. He nodded and decided to look at the options. After around 5 minutes, he spoke. "How do people even choose what to get?" He said. You shrugged and spoke. "Okay, since you're having a hard time choosing, how about this? I pick something for you, and you can see whether or not you like it. Sound good?" You asked. He smiled. "Sure, Broseph," he said. You turned around and grabbed a big chocolate muffin with some bits of white chocolate in it. You made sure it was monster food, and you set it on the counter. Fresh smiled and picked it up. You cleared your throat, catching his attention. You stared for a moment. Then Fresh caught the drift and put his hand in his pocket and took out some money and handed it to you. He walked around a bit, looking at the cafe, then decided to just sit at the counter, somewhere near you. You sighed and looked at the time. 1:25 p.m. Damn, it's past 1 already, you thought. You sighed and looked over to the blue-haired monster by Zach. They were socializing. You looked back to Fresh. A couple bites were taken out of the muffin, but he seemed to be zoned out. You turned around and grabbed a muffin, the same exact one Fresh had, and you made sure it was 100% monster food. You set your muffin on the counter and put some of your own money in the register, and you picked up the muffin and began to eat it. You seemed to like how monster food turned into straight energy. You didn't know what would happen if you ate normal food, but you didn't want to find out, having no organs and all. You looked around. The group of high schoolers was leaving, making a lot more room. You looked over to Zach and the blue-haired monster. They were exchanging phone numbers. Then the blue-haired monster waved bye to Zach.
Bye, Zach.
he said. Zack smiled. Bye, Tanner, he said. The monster, now known as Tanner, nodded and left the cafe. All this seemed to snap fresh out of its daze, and he looked around, noticing the cafe was now more spacious. Then he looked over to you. You were eating your muffin. He picked up his and took another bite. He only decided to come here because he was bored and wanted to try something a bit new. As Zach got up and started to leave, "Gotta go. Bye, Wyan," he called out. He smiled. "Bye, Zach," he said. Soon the rest of the people there gradually left. Once you and Fresh were the only ones inside the cafe, you dropped the act of having emotions. So did Fresh. "So, you're soulless too," you said. Fresh nodded. "Yeah," he said. You both stared for a moment. Then Fresh spoke. "So, were you born without one? That's the only reason I can think of that would allow you to still be alive," he said. You shook your head. "Do you know Ink?" you asked. He paused for a moment. "Yes, how do you know him?" he said. You crossed your arms over the counter, leaning on it. "He created me," you said. Fresh nodded, and remembered when Ink was in the middle of creating someone, or you, he teleported away. He looked into your eyes. They looked mostly normal, but he could see how dull they were. "So, how did you lose your soul?" he said. You looked to the ground. "Well, that's a bit of a touchy subject, don't you think?" he said. Fresh sighed. "Please, I want to know," he said. You looked back at him, staring into his eye sockets through his shades. "Error," he said. Fresh stayed silent. Still listening, you continued speaking. "I was in Underswap with Ink one day, and Error pulled me into the anti-void. One thing led to another. He ripped my soul apart. Right after he did..." You paused for a moment. Fresh leaned forward, wanting to know more. You continued. "I ended up puking up all my organs, and after that I passed out for a few minutes. When I woke up, I remember the faint feeling of anger, and I threw a few punches at Error. After that, Ink said I could reignite my soul, whatever that means," he said. Fresh thought. "So, if you have no organs, how can you eat?" he said, his hands gesturing to your muffin. "Oh, simple," you said, picking it up. "It's monster food. I don't have to worry about the potential consequences if I eat food that just turns into straight energy," you said. "So, what happens if you eat normal food?" he said. You paused, thinking for a minute. "I don't know," you said. Your eyes glanced at some sweets. You picked up a small cupcake and put some money in the register. You looked at Fresh. He shrugged. You thought for a minute. "Guess there's only one way to find out," you said. You took the wrapper off it and plopped it in your mouth. You chewed, then swallowed. Then instantly, you felt immense pain in your abdomen. You held your stomach, and projectile vomited blood and began to collapse. Fresh stood and teleported next to you. You shakily tried getting up, gripping your stomach. You began to cough, getting more blood on the ground and you. Fresh caught you before you collapsed again. Your breathing was ragged. Fresh picked you up and teleported. The last thing you saw before passing out was the sky of the doodle sphere.